This was heretical at the time. This idea that you would take a sysadmin or a systems engineer and pay them the exact same as a software engineer to put them on the same teams to have them working side by side. And it created these amazing collaborations that would not have been possible had you not mixed those kind of two populations and skill sets together.
This is Nathan LeClaire, independent coder and author, and you're listening to Coffee Moguls, the podcast interviewing internet entrepreneurs and icons who are tackling unconventional problems and getting unconventional results. On Coffee Moguls, we do deep dives so you can unpack what's behind their success, so you can get the edge you need in your career and in your business. Most of our guests and audience members love caffeine, so brew up a cup and settle in. Let's drink some coffee. Let's pump some iron. Let's start a company. It's Coffee Moguls. It's Coffee Moguls. But first, the disclaimer. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only and is not financial advice. The opinions are personal and not professional advice. Consult with a financial advisor before making any financial decisions. Today, I'm very excited to welcome to the podcast the one and only Liz Fong-Jones. How's it going, Liz?
Hey, Nathan. Long time no see.
I know, yes. Liz and I used to work together, and I left Honeycomb back in May. But I was always very impressed with Liz. And so, Liz, why don't you share with the listeners, just in case anyone out there doesn't know about you, just a little bit on what your background is.
Yeah, so I wear a number of hats. In my day job, I'm the principal developer advocate at Honeycomb, which means that I kind of look out for the interests of the broader site reliability engineering and observability communities and help kind of bring people together. And then I have quite a few side gigs. I'm an angel investor, and I also do advocacy around transgender rights. So that's kind of my broad kind of portfolio and remit in the world.
Right on. Yeah. And so one of the things, I might as well just kick it off here, that I'm always curious to know, because part of the podcast is just about doing large things, is how do you keep so much energy and fire up? What's your secret?
I find that frustration and rage actually tends to fuel a lot of what I do. If I'm not mad about something or upset about something, it's kind of hard to find the motivation to do something. But if I am fired up about something, I'm going to just go and solve it. That's kind of my philosophy to approaching problems.
Makes sense. Yeah. I mean, as an old punk now grown into an adult body, I relate to that a lot. That kind of inner rage. I mean, there's got to be something to it more though. Have you always been so kind of highly executive functioning, or was this something where you had to develop systems and that kind of thing?
I actually don't really necessarily think that what I individually do is important. It's what I collectively mobilize that's important. So I think a lot of the things that you see me accomplishing are things that I have the help of a lot of other people with doing, where I'll kind of catalyze the thing and give it a kick in the butt to get started. But kind of after that, other people are up and running with it. And therefore, I'm kind of able to conserve my energy, which is actually a kind of important point, which is it's also worth mentioning that I am disabled. I have an autoimmune condition, and the side effects from those meds means that I sleep basically an extra 12 to 24 hours every single week. So it's kind of a thing where, yes, I do a lot of stuff during the work week, but it's actually, I do wind up making trade-offs with where I choose to, I don't get a weekend, which is sucks in a lot of ways.
So there's two things I want to dig in on a little bit more there. So one is, you mentioned that mobilizing other people is really important. What have you found that you've learned over the years to become more effective at that has been important?
There are two very important things. One of which is that a lot of people have common cause or kind of have common things that they agree on, but don't necessarily have the energy to stand up and lead. So I'm kind of happy to connect people with each other so that they realize that they share this thing in common and should be working on it together. But I think the second thing that I think is maybe even more important than that is helping people formulate what are the actions they want to see? What do they want to have happen, right? You can have, 1,000 disgruntled people with torches and pitchforks, right? But is that actually going to result in change? Maybe, maybe not, right? Like, and kind of figuring out how do you digest that? How do you turn that into a list of actionable demands, right? A list of things that people can actually push towards, make progress on, and do so constructively without necessarily it feeling like, oh my God, like, there are people with torches and pitchforks, right? Like, I better dig into my position, and rather, have it be like, okay, let's have a conversation, right? Like, I think that both sides of that are important, both kind of finding the large group of people and getting them together, but also helping articulate what's the message, what's the demands.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I got to imagine that's a really common way that organizing sort of fails, right? Is that there's too many people going in too many different directions and they can't really have one common spearhead.
Yep. Outrage is something that you can right? Like, outrage is like, this like short fuse, it goes off and then like everyone regroups afterwards, right? Whereas if you want longer lasting change, you kind of have to work at it for a much longer period of time. And it may take longer, but you'll kind of get more longer lasting results.
Totally. Yeah. And so that makes a lot of sense. The other thing I was kind of wondering about is like, how did you build up your following, right? Like, you have tons of followers on Twitter and that kind of thing, and that doesn't happen overnight. So, what were the mechanics that went into building that community?
Yeah, I think it's one of these things that is challenging for people to do unless their brain is wired a particular way. In sociology, we talk about this idea of Dunbar's number, right? The number of people that you can keep kind of straight in your head and remember, like, who is this person? What are they interested in? What do they want? What can they provide? Right? Like, I'm not honestly not as good with faces to names as I would like to be, but I can be like, oh, that software engineer in Minneapolis who works at Microsoft, who works on Kubernetes. Oh, right, Bridget Cromhout, right? Like that's kind of how I map people in my head. And yeah, that's one of the fun and exciting things about being a autistic person whose special interest is people. So, and most people's Dunbar number is somewhere between 100 and 200. Whereas, to thrive in a career like developer advocacy or sales, right, like you kind of have to either in your own head or with, the aid of tools like Salesforce and index cards and all kinds of things, right? Like you have to keep those notes on who's who and how can people help each other, who needs to talk to who, right? So in my case, I do that mostly enabled by computers. So I keep, I think at this point, several thousand people straight in my head.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never really thought about people as a special interest before, but the way you describe it makes perfect sense.
Right, like, there's a stereotype that autistic people are, not interested in people, have problems reading facial expressions or body language, are into like trains and planes. And, yes, I do happen to love public transportation, but, I also happen to love people.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I definitely know that through sales and through just other things in my life, like if you dedicate yourself to sort of the study of like people, and you learn a lot.
Yeah, right. Like it is a thing that you can work at. It is a thing that you can use tools to help you with, right? Like it's not I'm good at this or I'm bad at this, but certainly it's easier for some people than others. You can work at it.
Yeah. I still have aspirations to maybe present sales to programmers as like the buying API. And like, here's how you write an integration for buying API. Sort of see if that might be a good educational technique.
Yeah, definitely that kind of intersection and that crossover is something that you have these kind of insular communities, right, of people who specialize in one thing or another. And then you kind of have the people that exist at the margins of those communities and kind of tie them together. And I think that's where a lot of the exciting stuff is, kind of where you have this, people talk about this idea in biology of estuaries, right? Like places where you have, where the land meets the sea and kind of where you have a much more dynamic ecosystem and environment.
Yeah. Tell me more about those estuaries. Like, what are some examples?
I think another interesting one there is kind of site reliability engineering, where the magical mixture that happened there was when Ben Trainor-Sloss, the founder of site reliability engineering at Google, said, we're going to build an ops function, but created by software engineers, designed for software engineers and systems engineers, and we're going to hire from both skill sets, and we're going to pay them the same, right? Like this was heretical at the time, this idea that you would take a sysadmin or a systems engineer and pay them the exact same as a software engineer to put them on the same teams, to have them working side by side. And it created these amazing collaborations that would not have been possible had you not mixed those kind of two populations and skill sets together.
Right. And so just to kind of catch me up, I think that what you're saying is that there was more prestige in just being a software engineer, and the people who ran the things in production, they didn't get paid as much. There wasn't as much of a allure to having that role.
And it was a lot more rote, right? Like there's this notion that, oh, you're just the ops people. We're going to throw things over the wall. You figure it out. Like, we're the ones who actually are building things, right? And it's like, hello, what about the making it work, right? Like, yeah.
Right. And so that kind of opens up the doors to all sorts of creativity in the field, right? One of which offshoots of that whole evolutionary tree is honeycomb, right?
Indeed, right? Like this idea, engineers should be empowered to run and maintain their own systems. And that was definitely an influence on Charity and Christine, the two founders of Honeycomb, when they worked together at Parse and became acquired by Facebook.
Right. Yeah. And so actually, why don't you tell us a little bit about kind of your experiences running things in production at Google, the different sort of approaches that you saw there? I've seen you mention this sort of Dapper versus Monarch, I think, before, and I definitely love some more context on what that is, and then how that kind of folds into what Honeycomb is. And you might want to even give a brief intro. I'm not sure everyone listening knows about Honeycomb.
Nathan, you've not been spilling the beans on your old employer on your new show.
No, I need people who are still there to come on and sort of share everything.
Excellent, wonderful. Well, I'd be delighted to. So one of the interesting things that happened in parallel, both at Google and Facebook, was these companies were hiring more and more engineers, building more and more complicated software systems involving many, many microservices, where you no longer could understand who's calling your service, what are they using it for, how do I diagnose problems in production at large scale. So when we started thinking about this problem at Google in 2017, we began doing this notion of trace exemplars, of kind of figuring out ways to glue traces into example traces into the monitoring solutions. And when I was doing discovery on that, I discovered that Honeycomb had actually built a tracing feature that was very, very similar to what we had done, except for instead of starting with the metrics and bolting traces on, they'd started with the traces and then bolted metrics on. So I came to the Honeycomb offices in 2018, hung out there, really enjoyed the conversations with the team. So when I started job hunting in 2019, Honeycomb was kind of a natural place for me to go to kind of continue this journey of helping engineers better understand their systems and to better implement the site reliability engineering principles that I've been advocating for many years. There are a lot of areas that, it's going to be interesting to see who wins in the next 5 years.
Right. Everyone's kind of writing the book as they go.
Yeah, in my case, literally writing the book as I go, right? Like I am, and the thing that I was turning around right before this was a update to the draft chapter on service level objectives and observability.
Okay, and this is the O'Reilly book?
Yes, this is the O'Reilly Observability Engineering book.
Awesome. Yeah, that's going to be great when that comes out.
Yeah, you can already read, I think, 2/3 of it. It's available online. We've got kind of the raw and edited versions up.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of pieces kind of being put together. Observability land, the game's still being played.
The game is still being played, but I think what is finally happening, which I'm grateful for, is there used to be a lot of confusion between vendor proprietary instrumentation that you'd have to rip out if you change vendors. And then there were two competing open source standards, open census and open tracing. And people really were not sure what to do, right, between open census, open tracing, and whatever their vendor was recommending. And over the past 2 years, what we've seen is everyone has agreed that it is a huge barrier to entry to the space for our end users. If end users have to rip out the instrumentation, redo it every time that they change vendors, that customers don't want lock-in and they don't want to kind of have obsolescence in their code, just baked into all of their code base.
Right. It used to be this kind of world where a substantial chunk of effort was going to just how do you get that data in, and everyone was kind of doing their own thing, and now everyone's sort of converging. So I do think it's an exciting time that people can start differentiating on sort of a different layer. Honeycomb just shipped some new and exciting stuff, so why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I took I just took 2 weeks off. I'm just back from 2 weeks off because in the beginning of June, we had our first user conference where we brought together our community of Honeycomb users to talk about what people's successes are, how people have successfully used our product. So we announced a number of really exciting things. I think most importantly was that we previously had kind of been blustering a little bit about how people don't really need metrics, and that's kind of only half true. People don't need custom application metrics, but people do still need kind of infrastructure level metrics in the event that there's a problem that can go all the way down to the infrastructure. It's not the first place I would start debugging, but it's helpful to know what's the percent CPU and memory utilization of a given node, right? How are we doing on our AWS EBS byte balance? No, that has bitten us before.
EBS byte balance? What's the byte balance?
Did you know every virtual machine and every AWS virtual EBS volume has a limit to the throughput of number of bytes and number of IOPS that you can push through it?
Oh, yeah? Like you can't read and write too much.
Yeah, you can't read and write too much, but the thing is, they'll briefly allow you for a period of 30 minutes or even up to 4 to 8 hours. They'll let you go full throttle, and then they'll suddenly clamp you down, right? So this kind of goes to this notion of oh my god, Friday deploys or 5 p.m. deploys, right? Like, and it turns out there is no safe time to push because no matter what day of the week that you push, like eventually some spike is going to happen in your traffic, and it's going to seem like it's coping, and then 4 or 5 hours later, it's just going to keel over, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it might have one of those kind of half working, degraded, sort of not quite fully knocked over, but not quite working right, sort of failure states too.
Right. So those are the kinds of things that we wanted to empower people to be able to debug in Honeycomb alongside their application trace and attribute data to be able to see what are the properties of the underlying system. So last month, we announced support both for the OpenTelemetry metrics specification to allow people to send that data, for instance, seamlessly from CloudWatch, and also to visualize those things side by side with your application event data to be able to see that graph of your metrics data alongside your event data. So that's kind of one of the main announcements that we made. But we also made a bunch of other announcements, for instance, around programmatic access to Honeycomb data for you to do custom integrations, for you to be able to use as a continuous integration gate. So those are kind of some of the things that we are hoping that people kind of build on and enjoy using.
Well, I think that's a huge one, right? Like, to me, that the query API, I guess is kind of what we would call it, the ability to access that Honeycomb data engine using your programs, not just by clicking around in a web interface. To me, that's one important stepping stones towards having a full-blown platform, right, where people could even build apps on top of it if they wanted to.
Yeah, it's this interesting challenge of encouraging people when they're playing with and exploring data to reach into Honeycomb and consider what they do kind of modifiable. I think that's kind of always been the challenge of any of our integrations, has been figuring out how do we do this in a way that doesn't kind of commoditize Honeycomb. Right? Kind of, we don't want to just be another graph on your Grafana wall of dashboards. We want you to actually interact with and see the power of your data.
Right. Like, you all don't want to be like Snowflake. You want to be like Tableau or something. I don't know. I'm just kind of pulling names out here, but
right, exactly. Kind of that interesting transition from all these previous gen BI providers to mode analytics, right? Like, kind of having it be the place you go has been really exciting. That's actually been a super fun and interesting thing. One of the in-jokes that we had at Honeycomb, while you were there, Nathan, was Toshak has a branch for that. So our colleague, Chris Toshak, actually demoed something really fun and exciting around using Honeycomb as a observable notebook data source, which is actually something that we do feel is a great kind of synthesis of capabilities, because like observable and like Grafana is like something that it actually rewards you and encourages you to kind of revise your query, rerun it, and like kind of play with your data.
Right. It's kind of like an IPython notebook.
Exactly, right? Like, so figuring out which of the things add the most value to users and help them see the most value out of Honeycomb, right? Like, that's kind of part of what's exciting for me about being part of the product brain trust at Honeycomb, right? Like, as someone who kind of spans that role of, yes, I sometimes, wear the product hat, and sometimes they wear the, voice of the user hat, and it's exciting to get to both.
Yeah, that's what I love about the API is I mean, it might not be the case that Honeycomb wants to make an IPython version of accessing Honeycomb and kind of displaying your data and that kind of thing. But with the API, there's always an escape hatch for people. So I think that's an exciting thing to
right,
add
exactly.
to the
People are
platform.
always going to want to do things you don't support inside of your UI. So, get out of their way, let them do it, but also provide the easy path and the happy path that lets people, without having to write code, understand what's going on.
Right, and it has all sorts of interesting operational challenges on your all side as well. I definitely think that the people running ops at Honeycomb continue to heroes.
Right, but it's everyone. Everyone is a hero at Honeycomb, right? Like it's not just an elite team of SREs, right? Like there are one full-time SRE and two half-time SREs at Honeycomb, right? Like everyone else is a product engineer who's on call for their own stuff.
Yeah, I thought that was a really unique aspect, and I'm grateful that I got an opportunity to be on call and be part of that culture while I was there. So a couple other things I wanted to make sure we cover. So as you are well aware, and I think a lot of people listening are probably well aware, we're starting to enter the throes of this big struggle over going back to the office and just everyone trying to define what does the future of look like? What does the future of work look like? What does the future of remote look like? And that kind of thing. And so I know you have some strong opinions on that. And so maybe just to start off, what do you think? What do you think of all these companies that are sort of trying to call people back to the office?
I think that companies that saw a dip in productivity during COVID and attributed it to remote work are doing themselves an extreme disservice. And by trying to kind of reverse that trend of, we're going to reverse this loss of productivity by bringing people back to the office on a mandatory basis, right? Like that's just going to hurt them more than it's going to help. There definitely are people who benefit from working in a office-like environment, either with actual colleagues or, working in a co-working space. But I don't think that making it mandatory for everyone is kind of the right move. And the companies that are doing these kind of return to work policies are very much seeing a lot of attrition right now that people have realized that they can do their jobs remotely. And the companies that are more forward thinking have realized that it is an asset to be able to hire people anywhere in the world, regardless of whether they have an office there. Right? I think it's this huge opportunity. There's going to be a huge reshuffling of talent that happens. But I think there's another angle to this, which is kind of the double slap in the face, right? Which is that companies are not just mandating return to offices; they're also attempting to do regional pay. They're suddenly saying, you know what, like you were gaining a San Francisco salary while living in Kentucky for the past 18 months. We're suddenly cutting your salary by 2/3. Right. And that kind of causes people to question, why is it that we have regional salary bands, right? Like the market for labor suddenly is very clear that it's global. It's not local, right? There is no longer this notion of what you pay a software engineer in Kentucky, because that engineer in Kentucky can work for any number of companies that are hiring remotely globally. So I think that kind of is going to be a shock to a number of companies when they start cutting people's compensation. They say, and those people say, actually, I'm leaving. Like I'm resigning and finding a job that will pay me world market rate, right? We shouldn't call it San Francisco market rate. We should call it world market rate.
Right. I think I saw a comic about that. I don't know. I think it might have been on that ex-Googler comics, that one that just came out. And it was about how all these companies, they have... no, they're incorporated in like tax havens, like the Cayman Islands or Ireland.
Right, and then they're suddenly developing this concern about distorting local economies, and it's like, haha, that's very funny.
Yeah, and then suddenly location matters when it comes to where their workers are, but not, where they get taxed. And so, yeah, I'm really curious to see how all that shakes out. I mean, why do you think that some of these companies have such a pathological insistence on people being in the office? Is it just lazy management?
It's control. People think that, right, people are control freaks. I think that is a mentality that becomes required the higher up in the seniority ladder you get at these large companies. And we saw this blow up this past week, actually, with a Google executive who's the Google employee number 4 or something, who's the senior vice president in charge of all of infrastructure and operations and platform at Google, who said, on one hand, like, I'm mandating everyone come back to the office, or like have their compensation adjusted. And then in the same breath, like the next week, he said, oh, and by the way, I'm moving to New Zealand for a year just to see how my wife and I like it, right? And I'll continue to do my job remotely from there, right? And there's this dissonance of, one set of rules for you and the other set of rules for me. And in fact, I personally know of a employee who was put through the ringer when he wanted to move back to New Zealand, not to visit, but because he wanted to move back there with his family because he's a New Zealand citizen, right? Like, and kind of this disparate treatment of, one rule for you, and one rule for the other. And it doesn't even hold up in terms of, seniority, must be the senior who work remotely, because like this person is one of the most accomplished site reliability engineers at Google, right? Like, and it was clear that this was just, a senior vice president, like, exercising his senior management, pulling the senior management card to get this approved, right? Essentially self-approving it, right? Like, and that kind of thing it just does not go over well, right? Like it really doesn't. It was just so dismissive, right? So condescending.
Yeah. For any management team out there, if they were to come to you and ask, what can we do? What can we do to be supportive of people in this time? What are kind of the principles or the tenets of good leadership and good management in these confusing times? What would you suggest?
I think the thing that I'm going to highlight is not everyone is in the same situation coming out of this pandemic. Yes, there are people who are going to be much more productive than they were before, but there also are going to be people who are still worried about getting COVID, who have disabilities. There are going to be people who have lost their parents. There are going to be people who have been solo parenting for the past, year and a half, right? And I think that, and holding down their job at the same time, right? Like, I think that recognizing those individual circumstances and adjusting for them and making accommodations is going to be the most important. Certainly, by now, if you haven't learned how to use remote work tools like Slack and like Zoom and like Google Meet, right, like you're going to be behind the ball. But I think that, from an HR perspective, the main thing is like meet people where they are, invest in your people, because if you don't invest in your people, like they're not going to show you loyalty. They're going to be looking for other jobs now that kind of the floodgates are open.
One thing I have picked up on a lot from you that I think a lot of people don't realize is that employees have power. Employees have a ton of leverage, and they don't have to put up with poor management, unethical things going on.
At least in the tech sector, many of us do have more leverage. But, it's a question of how do we figure out that leverage before things get commoditized, right? Like that is a fear that I have, is that eventually there's going to be a glut of labor in the market, because that's what employers want to be able to do, is to cut their labor costs down.
Right. High prices, fix high prices. Programmers have a high price right now.
That's not going to be forever. Yeah, that's not going to be forever. So we kind of have a concrete time horizon of 5 years, maybe 10 years to figure this out, or else the same form of disruption that we as tech workers unleashed upon taxi workers is going to be itself unleashed upon us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming you're alluding to things like Copilot.
Yep. I'm alluding to that, and also like boot camps. Like, I think that boot camps are a great way of getting more people into programming and into higher paying jobs than they have today. But I think that does erode the collective bargaining power that we have as tech workers today. So kind of balancing that and making sure that, people are not exploited coming out of boot camps, right? I think that that's going to be super important.
Exactly. Yeah. Making sure that they know their worth.
Yeah. And they should earn what they're worth. Yeah. Yeah.
Like the industry just has this tendency to try and churn through the people who are older or, kind of know a little better. They don't necessarily come in on the weekends if it's not going to be worth it. So we're kind of getting to time here, but thank you very much for coming on, Liz. And if you'd like to plug anything or kind of give a shout out to something, we'll link your Twitter in the description. But is there anything in particular?
Yeah, you can find me at Liz the Gray. And yeah, please do feel free to check out Honeycomb. But, I'm primarily here as a person and as a worker, rather than necessarily to shill for Honeycomb.
Right on. Well, thank you very much for coming on, Liz. It's been a pleasure.